What would you do if the world doubted you? Not because of what you carried, not because of your accomplishments, but simply because of how you looked on a quiet evening flight at 30,000 feet. One woman sat in seat 2A. She was calm. She was poised. She carried more power than anyone on board could imagine. And yet, to the crew, she looked like just another passenger. When a tray was dropped into her lap with words meant to belittle, she didn't raise her voice, she didn't argue, she didn't plead her case. She reached into her bag, pulled out a seal of authority, and placed it on the tray. And in that single, silent gesture, the cabin froze. Whispers spread, phones rose. A truth long ignored was laid bare. Why did silence shake an entire system more than anger ever could? Why did one woman's restraint become the spark for reform across an industry? And what does it say about dignity, power, and the way we see one another stay with us? Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. The story begins now. The glass panels of Terminal 6 at Los Angeles International shimmered under the late afternoon sun. Travelers hurried past one another, balancing carry-ons, coffee cups, and fragments of conversations that drifted like static in the air. The boarding call for Flight 417 to New York echoed through the loudspeakers, polite but insistent. A line began forming at the gate, a familiar choreography of impatience and fatigue. Among the crowd, Ariana Miles moved with a calm stride. Her attire was deliberate in its restraint, a tailored navy blazer over a simple gray blouse, pressed black trousers, and flats polished to a muted shine. A single leather tote hung neatly from her shoulder. Nothing screamed for attention, and that was the point. She had spent years perfecting the art of being underestimated, of blending into rooms where her presence was not anticipated. For Ariana, silence had always been both armor and instrument. The jet bridge groaned with its metallic hiss as she stepped forward. Air pressure shifted when the cabin door opened, releasing the crisp scent of conditioned air and faint traces of jet fuel. Inside, the first-class cabin hummed with the subdued tension of boarding overhead bins slamming shut, hushed greetings between strangers, the occasional rattle of wheels over carpet. Ariana's gaze stayed steady, not hurried, not hesitant. As she walked toward her seat 2A by the window, front left. Near the galley stood Laura Bennett, head flight attendant, clipboard tucked in the crook of her arm. She scanned her manifest with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. When she looked up, her eyes landed on Ariana. For half a second she paused, squinting as though recalibrating. Then she leaned toward a colleague and muttered low, but not low enough. Another one of the ground crew. They're letting anybody walk into first class now. Ariana heard every syllable. Her posture didn't change. She did not raise her head, did not offer correction. Instead, she moved to her seat with the same deliberate quiet, sliding her tote beneath the seat in front of her and settling with composed ease. Silence. Once again, her chosen language. Moments later, Laura approached with a smile that seemed more practiced than warm. She held out her hand with expectation rather than courtesy. "Ticket, please." Ariana unlocked her phone and pulled up the digital boarding pass. The QR code glowed faintly against the screen as she held it out. Laura scanned, then hesitated, her brow furrowed. "Huh," she murmured. "Seat 2A." She scanned again, the pause stretching just a second too long. Ariana met her gaze without a word, the quiet, unyielding. Laura eventually handed the phone back. "Just checking," she said flatly. "We've had some seat mix-ups lately." Ariana offered only a neutral nod, then turned her face toward the window. Outside, the tarmac bustled with motion luggage carts weaving between fuel trucks, orange-vested workers guiding aircraft into place. Watching it all gave her something to focus on other than the subtle sting blooming in her chest. She had experienced this before. Different cities, different contexts, always the same undercurrent. Doubt was her unwelcome companion. Was she in the right seat? Did she belong? Was she allowed? The questions were rarely asked aloud, but always implied in the tones, the looks, the unnecessary pauses, and each time she reminded herself, belonging is not granted, it is carried. Still, the weight of it pressed against her ribs. The boarding process stretched on. Vivian Cross entered next a woman draped in a pearl-colored coat, gold chain heels clicking against the carpet. Her perfume arrived half a second before she did, floral and sharp, maneuvering into the aisle. Her oversized purse brushed against Ariana's shoulder without apology. She sighed, the kind of sigh that was both dismissal and announcement, before sliding into seat 2B beside her. Ariana did not react. She had learned long ago that not every slight needed a response, not every insult required a reply. She folded her hands on her lap and let her breathing steady. Laura reappeared soon after, tray in hand, offering champagne flutes with a bright tone. Compliments to our first-class guests. The glasses gleamed, condensation sliding down their stems. Yet, when she angled the tray, the flute farthest from Ariana seemed the only one within reach. The glass nearest her had a sticky stem, residue from a hurried pour. Ariana declined with a soft shake of her head. "Suit yourself," Laura chirped, already moving on. The cabin filled in fits and starts, overhead bins slamming shut, passengers exchanging quick words about luggage space for Ariana. The noise felt distant. She stayed still, eyes fixed on the horizon framed by her window, where sunlight was beginning to dip toward amber. Her mind moved inward, replaying the muttered remark she'd overheard minutes earlier. Another one of the ground crew. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual certainty with which they were spoken, the confidence of a judgment unexamined. Inside her chest, something flickered, part irritation, part exhaustion. She thought of her father's voice, steady and low from years ago. Strength isn't about the volume of your reply, it's about the timing of your truth. He had told her this after a teacher once assumed she had plagiarized an essay too eloquent for someone like her. She had learned then the art of waiting, of choosing the right moment. But each time it repeated, each time another voice echoed the same disbelief. The question gnawed deeper. How long should one wait? She shifted slightly in her seat, straightening her posture. Around her, the ritual of departure unfolded, flight attendants securing bins, passengers checking phones, the distant rumble of engines stirring to life. Ariana closed her eyes briefly. A breath in, a breath out. Silence again, wrapping her like a cloak. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Ariana rested her hands lightly on the armrests. She knew this flight would not pass quietly. Already, currents of tension swirled beneath the calm surface of the cabin. She could sense it the way Laura's glance lingered, the way Vivian's sighs carried weight, the way judgment had already been cast. She had lived this script before, but this time she also carried something else with her. something resting in her tote, nestled in velvet, something that could alter the course of the flight not through anger, not through argument, but through presence alone. For now, though, she stayed silent. The engines roared, the runway blurred, and Flight 417 lifted into the darkening sky. The seatbelt sign chimed as the plane began its climb, engines roaring beneath the floorboards. Ariana Miles kept her gaze fixed on the window, the lights of Los Angeles shrinking into a patchwork glow. Around her, the cabin adjusted to flight mode. Phones switched off, belts clicked into place. The soft murmur of conversation settled into the air like background music. Vivian Cross, the pearl-coated passenger beside her, continued adjusting her handbag, digging for something with brisk impatience. A compact mirror flashed briefly in the overhead light, followed by a tube of lipstick, then a packet of tissues. Ariana shifted slightly to make space, but Vivian's elbow knocked against her tray table. A sharp jolt rattled through the champagne flute still resting there. With a sudden jerk, the glass tipped. Red wine arced across the narrow space, spilling onto Ariana's tray and across the edge of her sleeve. "Oh dear," Vivian said without looking up. Her tone was casual, almost distracted. "That shouldn't stain." "Right. These seats are leather." Ariana's eyes followed the crimson streak as it dripped down the seam of the tray table. She inhaled once, slowly, and turned her gaze back to the window. Not a word, not a gesture, just silence. Within seconds, Laura Bennett appeared at her side, a cocktail napkin already crumpled in her hand. She pressed it forward toward Ariana, her lips twisted in something between a smirk and forced concern. "Might want to take care of that before it sets." The paper napkin was thin, already damp in her fingers. Ariana accepted it without response, placed it neatly on the tray, and left it untouched. Laura's brows rose as though amused. Or not. She muttered, retreating toward the galley. The hush of first class returned, but it carried a new weight. A few passengers glanced discreetly toward 2A, then away. The small scene had been observed, catalogued, filed in the unspoken archive of injustice too subtle to be written down, but too sharp to forget. Ariana's heartbeat pulsed in her ears. She kept her face serene, but inside a storm gathered. She remembered the countless times her competence had been questioned, the moments her seat at a table had been mistaken for chance rather than merit. Each memory pressed forward, an army of ghosts whispering, "You don't belong here." She closed her eyes briefly, fighting the wave. Belonging is not granted, it is carried. Her father's words repeated like a mantra. Still, she wondered, how many more times would she have to carry it? The plane leveled at cruising altitude. Cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling the beginning of the meal service. Laura reappeared, this time balancing a tray piled with economy-class meal boxes and plastic bottles of water. Her arms were full, her posture taut with the strain of balancing the load, yet she stopped deliberately at Ariana's row. She tilted the tray downward and spoke in a voice just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Here, hold this. You look like you're used to serving anyway." The words fell like stones in water. The clatter of utensils echoed as the tray landed squarely across Ariana's lap. The weight pressed down, both physical and metaphorical. Laughter flickered from row 3, quickly smothered but not absent. A wave of heat rushed through Ariana's chest. For a moment, she imagined herself standing, imagined raising her voice, imagined letting every ounce of her power pour out in fury. But then she exhaled. Not yet. Her hands moved instead toward the tote beneath her seat. The zipper's sound was soft but sharp, slicing through the murmurs of the cabin. She drew out a small velvet-lined case, its edges smooth from years of careful handling. With unhurried precision, she opened it. Inside lay the seal. The wooden handle glowed faintly under the cabin light, its brass head polished to a gleam. Etched into the metal were two symmetrical wings spiraling into an 8-pointed star, the emblem of Skylark Global. It was no ornament. It was authority distilled into form, a mark that only one person in the world was permitted to carry. Ariana lifted it with calm hands and placed it squarely on the tray Laura had dropped in her lap. The sound of brass against plastic echoed louder than the engines. The room shifted. The laughter died instantly. A hush fell over first class, the kind that stretches longer than seconds and grows heavier with every heartbeat. The seal caught the light, glinting against the dull gray of the tray, radiating something unspoken yet undeniable. Passengers froze mid-motion. Vivian's hand, still clutching her compact, trembled as she realized the gravity of the object now resting beside her. From behind, a man in a blue blazer leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's the Skylark Executive Seal." He turned toward his companion. "She owns the airline." The ripples spread like fire in dry grass. Murmurs swirled, some hushed, some bolder. "It can't be real. I saw her picture once, Skylark's last shareholder summit. That's her. It has to be." Phones rose discreetly, cameras catching the seal's reflection, recording the moment for timelines already hungry for scandal. Laura stood frozen, her professional smile stripped away. She glanced around the cabin as though searching for an escape route. Her knuckles tightened around her clipboard. She swallowed, then forced her voice to steady. "Miss Miles, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Ariana lifted her gaze for the first time, her eyes meeting Laura's with a stillness that burned sharper than any words. Silence held the weight of verdict. Laura's throat bobbed. She tried again, her tone thinner. It was just a joke. The tray. Airline humor. The attempt at levity fell flat, crushed under the silence pressing in from every corner of the cabin. From row 4, a young man in a tailored gray suit spoke aloud, his phone still angled toward the scene. "You might want to stop talking. It's only making it worse." Laura flushed crimson. She took a shaky step back, her voice rising in desperation. "If you think this is some kind of power play, it's not going to work. People throw titles around all the time. Doesn't mean anything up here." Another passenger cut her off, voice firm. "She doesn't need to throw anything. She's the one who signs your performance contracts." The words landed with finality. Laura's composure cracked. She turned sharply, retreating into the galley without another word. But the silence she left behind remained thick, electric, unbroken. Ariana's fingers rested lightly on the edges of the tray beside the seal, her face serene. She did not gloat, she did not smirk, she simply waited. Across the aisle, whispers crackled, screens lit up with quick searches. Within minutes, confirmation spread photos of Ariana at industry events, interviews in business journals, standing beside aircraft prototypes with the same seal in her hand. It was her. It was real. Vivian Cross, who had spilled her wine minutes earlier, sat stiffly now, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She stared at the seal with wide eyes, no longer fussing with cosmetics or sighing in entitlement. The power she had assumed, the unspoken hierarchy she had leaned on, dissolved in silence. A teenage boy in 2C leaned toward his mother, whispering with awe. "She's like a secret boss, like real life." His mother nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Ariana. "Yes, and you just watched what real power looks like." Ariana remained still. She let the silence do its work. Let the presence of the seal speak louder than rage, louder than defense, louder than anything she could have said. She had carried it for years, knowing one day it would not just symbolize authority, it would be her answer to every doubt, every slight, every dismissal. Tonight, mid-flight above the continent, that moment had come. The aircraft rocked gently with turbulence. Gasps rose, but no one looked away from 2A. The seal glinted beneath the overhead lights, brass shining against plastic, a silent declaration that the world could not ignore. Inside, Ariana felt the storm inside her chest begin to quiet. Not because the insult no longer hurt, but because she had chosen the moment, chosen silence until silence became undeniable. She leaned back slowly, her breathing steady, her eyes drifting closed. Around her, the cabin still buzzed with murmurs, but none dared break the spell of what they had witnessed. The tray, the seal, the silence together. They had shifted the room, not with volume, not with force, but with presence, and everyone knew nothing on this flight would ever feel ordinary again. The turbulence eased, but the atmosphere in first class did not. The hum of the engines filled the silence that Laura Bennett had left behind. Ariana Miles sat still, her seal glinting faintly against the plastic tray, an anchor in a storm of shifting perceptions. Eyes darted toward her and away again, as if she were the center of gravity in the cabin and everyone else orbited at a cautious distance. Phones tilted at discrete angles, a flicker of blue light reflected off sunglasses pushed up on foreheads. Whispers carried, some muffled behind hands, others shamelessly spoken into microphones for voice notes. The story was leaving the cabin before the plane even touched the ground. In row 3, the man in the blue blazer opened his laptop and began typing furiously. Lines of a blog post formed in real time. He titled it with the precision of a headline that would trend by morning. The day silence shattered the skies. His fingers tapped steadily, recording not just the moment of insult, but the moment of revelation. He included every detail he could remember, the way the tray clattered, the way the brass seal had caught the light, the stillness of Ariana's hands. Each keystroke felt like part of history. Across the aisle, a teenage girl with braids whispered to her mother, "Mom, it's already on TikTok." She angled her phone so her mother could see. The screen displayed Ariana, captured in shaky video, her seal gleaming as passengers gasped softly in the background. A caption scrolled across the top. Black CEO handed a tray mid-flight, her response silent, powerful. The girl's eyes widened. "Look, it's at 50,000 views already." Her mother frowned, pressing a finger to her lips. "Keep your voice down." But her eyes betrayed the same mix of awe and anger coursing through half the cabin. They all knew they had witnessed something that would not remain confined to this metal tube hurtling across the sky. Laura had not returned. Somewhere in the galley she hid, clutching her earpiece, her breath shallow. She was on the line with ground operations, her words tumbling in panicked fragments. "I didn't know. She didn't say anything. She was just sitting there." How was I supposed to know? A supervisor's voice cut sharp through the static. You'll explain yourself to corporate when you land. Laura's knees buckled slightly. She braced against the counter, cold sweat forming at her temples. Back in 2B. Vivian Cross shifted uneasily. Her earlier superiority had evaporated into something tighter, more brittle. She glanced toward Ariana, then away, then back again. The proximity to power unsettled her. She had spent her life maneuvering rooms with jewelry and posture, but the woman beside her had shifted an entire aircraft without raising her voice. Vivian tapped her nail against the armrest, as if sound could disguise her discomfort. She wanted to speak an apology, perhaps, but the words caught in her throat. Ariana, meanwhile, leaned back against the seat, her eyes still closed, her breathing measured. Outwardly, she was serenity itself. Inside, thoughts collided like crosswinds. The humiliation still burned, but deeper than anger lay the question that returned to her again and again. Why did silence have to be her weapon? Why did restraint become her armor when fury should have been enough? She knew the answer, but she hated it that in rooms like this, with faces like Laura's and Vivian's, her silence was often the only tool they could not twist into caricature. Every word she spoke would have been spun as aggression, every protest framed as disruption. So she had chosen stillness, and stillness had become thunder. The flight attendants who had not been involved moved through the cabin cautiously, performing their duties with rigid politeness. Coffee was poured with hands that trembled ever so slightly. Snack baskets were offered with voices pitched carefully neutral. Each interaction with Ariana carried an unspoken plea. Please don't see me as complicit. Please don't put me in the story. But the story was already bigger than them. Near the back of first class, a young man in a slim gray suit raised his phone higher. His camera focused squarely on the seal. He had the practiced hand of someone used to documenting moments that mattered. His name was Diego Ruiz, a 26-year-old law student en route to New York for a moot court competition. He wasn't wealthy, but his ticket to first class had been a last-minute upgrade gifted by frequent flyer points from his aunt. Fate, it seemed, had placed him in this cabin tonight. He whispered into his microphone, narrating softly, "She hasn't said a word. That's what makes it powerful. The seal's on the tray. Everyone's staring. The flight attendant's gone. I don't think people understand yet this isn't just a story about service. It's about judgment, about who we think belongs where." He stopped recording and uploaded the clip. Within minutes, the views surged, comments rolled in. This is the kind of dignity that makes me tear up. Proof that racism is alive even 30,000 feet up. Her silence is louder than any speech. Vivian's phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it at first, but curiosity got the better of her. She pulled it out, unlocked the screen, and froze. There she was, captured in the corner of the frame. Her pearl coat unmistakable. The wine spill, the glance away. The video was viral, and she was part of the evidence. Her cheeks flushed as realization settled heavy in her chest. The world might not know her name, but they would remember the woman who dismissed the spill, who didn't bother to apologize. She wanted to vanish into the seat. Ariana opened her eyes slowly, as though surfacing from deep water. She saw Vivian's expression, the panic rising just beneath her polished exterior. For a fleeting second, Ariana considered offering reassurance, a gesture of grace. But then she thought of every young black woman who had been told to be gracious in the face of dismissal. Every expectation that they should ease the discomfort of those who disrespected them. She let the moment pass without a word. The captain's voice broke the silence over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cruising at 37,000 feet. Our estimated arrival into JFK is just under 4 hours. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." His voice was smooth, professional, almost oblivious to the firestorm brewing just beyond the cockpit door. But no one was relaxing. Passengers scrolled furiously through feeds, sending screenshots to friends, captioning their own posts. In real time, the story was escaping the confines of aluminum walls and recycled air. By the time the plane landed, Ariana's silence would have already traveled further than the aircraft itself. Laura finally re-emerged, her face pale, her hair slightly disheveled. She stepped into the aisle, her smile stretched thin, her eyes darting nervously from passenger to passenger. "We'll be starting our dinner service shortly," she announced, her voice pitched artificially bright. No one responded. The silence that greeted her was sharper than any words. She looked down the aisle, caught Ariana's steady gaze, and faltered. For a moment, she stood frozen. Then she turned abruptly and vanished once again into the galley. Whispers surged louder now, a collective tide. A man in row 5 chuckled darkly. "She's done. There's no coming back from this." His companion leaned closer, her voice low. "Do you think the CEO will fire her mid-flight?" The idea hung in the air, absurd yet tantalizing. Everyone imagined it. The seal on the tray, the silence in the cabin, and then the ultimate reversal. But Ariana gave no sign. She sat with a quiet composure, letting the whispers grow until they became their own indictment. Diego uploaded another clip, this one featuring Laura's awkward reappearance and the tense silence that met her. He added a caption, "When the room already knows you've lost, words just dig the hole deeper." His followers multiplied by the second. The whisper network had become a chorus. A teenage boy in 2C leaned across the aisle toward Ariana, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and nerves. "Miss, are you really the CEO?" His mother gasped softly, tugging him back by the sleeve. "Don't bother her." But Ariana turned her head, her expression softening. She didn't speak. She simply inclined her head once, a quiet confirmation. The boy's face lit with awe. His mother's eyes filled with tears. That single nod carried more weight than 1,000 words. By the midpoint of the flight, the videos had reached millions. Hashtags trended: "Chewit Silent Power," "Seal Moment," "CEO and 2A." Comment sections erupted with debates, support, outrage, solidarity, and all the while, Ariana remained silent. She understood instinctively that the less she said, the more powerful the truth became. The seal was not just a symbol of authority. Now it was a mirror reflecting the biases of everyone who looked at it. As the lights dimmed for dinner service, the cabin felt suspended in a strange tension. Ordinary rituals, clinking cutlery, pouring drinks, adjusting seats played out against the backdrop of a revolution unfolding in whispers and screens. It was no longer just a flight. It was a stage, and every passenger was both actor and witness. Ariana folded her hands gently in her lap and looked out at the endless night sky beyond the window. The stars shimmered against blackness, silent and eternal. In their reflection, she found her calm again. She had not planned for this moment. She had not sought it, but it had arrived, and she had answered it without a word. Silence was never absence. It was choice. And tonight, her choice was being heard across the world. The dinner carts rattled softly as they rolled down the aisle, guided by two junior attendants who had been avoiding Ariana's row with almost military precision. They whispered to each other behind forced smiles, glancing toward the front galley as though the answers to everything waited behind that curtain. The cabin lights dimmed, a simulated twilight settling across first class, but tension glowed brighter than any overhead lamp. Laura Bennett remained in the galley, her back pressed against the stainless steel counter. Her earpiece buzzed again. "Laura, report," came the clipped voice from operations control. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "The situation is under control." She said it with as much conviction as she could muster, though her trembling hands betrayed her. Her supervisor's voice cut back, sharper this time. "Don't lie to me. We're watching live. Do you understand this is already out?" Laura closed her eyes, dread rising in her chest like nausea. The walls of the galley felt closer, the hum of the ovens unbearably loud. She remembered Ariana's eyes calm, unyielding, piercing without a word. Laura had built her career on authority in the cabin. Her voice, her presence, her posture had been her tools, but against silence, against stillness that drew every gaze, her tools had turned to dust. She thought of all the times she had judged passengers by the cut of their clothes, by the weight of their carry-ons, by the way they hesitated when asked a question. She had never been called on it before. Never. And now, the one time her instinct had chosen wrong. The price would be everything. In the cabin, whispers thickened. Vivian Cross leaned toward Ariana again, her voice low, brittle. "Look, I don't know who you are exactly, but this is escalating. Don't you think maybe you should say something?" Ariana turned her head just slightly, meeting Vivian's eyes. The silence between them lengthened until Vivian looked away. Her cheeks flushed. Ariana did not owe her an answer. That truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. 3 rows back, Diego Ruiz uploaded another video, this time his commentary softer, almost reverent. "She still hasn't spoken. That's what makes this unbearable for the crew. They can't script silence. They can't explain it away. It's their move, and every second they wait, the world is moving without them." His words gained traction online, amplified by strangers who found poetry in his observations. Diego didn't know it yet, but his voice was becoming part of the narrative, the young witness who recognized what others had missed. Laura pressed her palms against the counter, forcing herself to stand straight. She could not hide forever. She stepped out of the galley, her smile brittle, her tone rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, dinner service will begin shortly. We appreciate your patience." Her eyes flickered toward Ariana's row, then skittered away like startled birds. She clutched the handle of the nearest cart, guiding it forward, determined to prove she could still control the room. But the silence that met her was worse than open hostility. No polite nods, no murmured thanks, just quiet stares, phones raised, lenses catching every micro-expression. When she reached row 2, her voice caught. "Ma'am, would you like the chicken or the pasta tonight?" The question was addressed to Vivian Cross, but her eyes slid involuntarily toward Ariana. Vivian answered quickly, her voice too bright. "Pasta, please." Laura set the dish down with shaking hands, the fork clattering against porcelain. She turned next, tray hovering uncertainly, to Ariana. For a heartbeat, The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Ariana looked up slowly. Not defiant, not angry, just steady. Her eyes met Laura's, and in that moment, Laura felt stripped bare. She tried to form the words. Chicken pasta. Anything but, they withered before they left her tongue. Ariana didn't move. She didn't reach for the tray. She didn't nod or shake her head. She simply existed in that silence, and Laura's hands began to tremble so violently that a small bottle of water slipped, tumbling to the floor with a soft thud. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Laura knelt quickly, scrambling to retrieve it, her composure shattered. A man in row 4 spoke suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. Maybe let someone else handle this. His tone was not cruel, but final. It was the kind of suggestion that was really an order, backed by the murmurs of agreement from passengers around him. Laura froze, her pride battling the humiliation gnawing at her. She wanted to shout, to insist she was still in charge, but the weight of every camera trained on her pressed her down harder than gravity. She backed away, muttering something about the galley, and disappeared once more behind the curtain. Ariana lowered her gaze, her breath steady. Inside, though, her thoughts churned. She had not wanted this spectacle. She had not wanted a woman's career to unravel midair, even if that woman had been careless, even cruel. Yet part of her also knew the stakes were larger than one person. This was not just about Laura Bennett. This was about a culture that had always asked Ariana and women like her to prove themselves twice, 3 times, endlessly. Tonight, the reckoning had chosen its stage, and Ariana had chosen not to run from it. Vivian shifted uncomfortably beside her. "This is going to ruin her," she muttered, almost to herself. Ariana tilted her head slightly, finally breaking her silence with the softest of words. She ruined herself. The words were calm, even gentle, but they cut sharper than any accusation. Vivian had no reply. She sank back into her seat, her pearl necklace heavy around her throat. In the galley. Laura's composure cracked. She gripped the edge of the counter, tears pricking at her eyes. The junior attendants hovered uncertainly, unsure whether to comfort her or keep their distance. Her earpiece buzzed again. "Laura, corporate wants a full statement the moment you land," the supervisor said. Laura's voice shook as she whispered, Do they know who she is?" The reply came cold and certain. "Everyone knows. And now the whole world does too." The hum of the engines filled the silence once more. Ariana rested her hands lightly on the armrests, her posture the same as it had been since takeoff, composed, unwavering. To the passengers around her, she seemed unshakable, a pillar of calm. But inside, Ariana wrestled with her own storm. Dignity was heavy. Restraint was exhausting. She longed to exhale the anger that coiled in her chest, to name it, to burn it away with truth. But she also knew the power of holding back, of letting silence expose what words could not. As the carts moved down the aisle without Laura, whispers flared again. Someone muttered that this would hit the news before they landed. Another whispered that lawyers were already circling. A third leaned closer to his companion, murmuring, "This is the end of business as usual." The phrase stuck. Passengers repeated it softly, like a prophecy, as though the moment had already rewritten rules far beyond this cabin. Diego sat back in his seat, phone resting in his lap, his heart pounding. He wasn't just witnessing history, he was recording it, amplifying it. He thought of his classes, of the cases he had studied about dignity and rights, about how silence in law was sometimes as powerful as testimony. For the first time, the theory felt alive before his eyes. He looked at Ariana, and a quiet vow formed inside him. He would not just witness this, he would carry it forward. Ariana closed her eyes once more, leaning into the hum of the engines, the endless dark beyond the window. The seal still rested in her bag, its weight familiar, its meaning undeniable. She had placed it once, and the world had shifted. Now it simply waited, a reminder that silence was not weakness, but choice. She breathed deeply, letting the whispers swell and fade around her. Whatever storm awaited them at JFK, she was ready. The galley curtain quivered as Laura sank to the floor, her face buried in her hands. For the first time in her career, she realized that authority did not belong to the uniform, or the clipboard, or the title. It belonged to the truth reflected back by those who refused to flinch. And tonight, that truth had been carried by silence. The cabin seemed quieter than it should have been, even with the low murmur of conversations, the clink of cutlery, and the occasional cough. There was a density to the air, as if every passenger had become an unwilling participant in a theater where silence was the lead performer. Ariana Miles sat motionless in 2A, her tote zipped beneath the seat, her breathing steady. She could sense the eyes on her, some curious, some reverent, others skeptical, all caught in the pull of what had unfolded. Diego Ruiz glanced down at his phone again. Notifications poured in faster than he could swipe them away. The short clip he had uploaded, no longer than 30 seconds, had already crossed 3 million views in under an hour. The caption he had typed in haste. She didn't say a word, but she said everything, was being repeated across platforms. Strangers were stitching his video, adding their own commentary. Some demanded accountability from the airline. Others debated whether silence could be power. Hashtags multiplied like sparks from dry tinder. The Trey moment. Silent power. CEO in 2A. Vivian Cross clutched her pearl necklace, her posture stiff as though she wanted to separate herself from the growing storm. She typed quickly on her phone, sending messages to her contacts in the financial press. There's a woman in first class claiming authority she doesn't have. She wrote. The replies came back uncertain. One friend responded. Check again. Rumors say Ariana Miles is on board. If true, you might want to stay quiet. Vivian's stomach tightened. She glanced sideways at Ariana, but Ariana had not moved. Her face still turned toward the window, as though the world outside held more weight than the cabin itself. Laura Bennett remained in the galley, pale, her knees drawn toward her chest as she sat on the narrow jump seat. She scrolled through her phone, desperate to find a counter-narrative, something to cling to. But every update made her chest constrict further. Flight attendant humiliates black woman mid-air. Read one trending headline. Another flashed across a popular newsfeed passenger places CEO seal on tray. Crew caught, stunned. Laura wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that she hadn't known, that she hadn't meant it. But intent mattered little now. What the world had seen was not her intent. It was her dismissal, her sneer, her arrogance. And Ariana's silence had amplified it louder than any voice could. Back in 2A, Ariana's thoughts drifted to Skylark Global, to the boardroom she would face after landing. She pictured the directors' faces, some supportive, others skeptical, all measuring her every word. She knew they would ask if she planned this moment, if she had engineered the silence as strategy. They would be wrong. She had not staged any of this. But she also knew that leadership was not about whether you asked for a moment. It was about what you did once the moment found you. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself against the thrum of the engines. The captain's voice crackled overhead, professional but tinged with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into New York. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened and tray tables secured." The announcement, routine under any other circumstance, now felt like a signal. The end of the flight was approaching, but the consequences of what had happened mid-air were only beginning. Across the aisle, a teenage girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, that video says it's her. She's like the real owner." The mother hushed her quickly but didn't deny it. In fact, her own phone glowed with the same video. Ariana's seal glinting under cabin light. She kept glancing toward 2A, her eyes soft with something close to admiration. Vivian leaned closer, whispering in a clipped voice, "You do realize this is out of control now. Whatever you are, you've started a fire." Ariana turned slowly, her gaze level, her tone calm. Fires don't start by themselves. They start because the ground was already dry. Vivian blinked, her lips parting, but she found no words to reply. The answer hung in the air, final and irrefutable. In the galley. Laura's earpiece buzzed once more. "Bennett," came the sharp voice of her supervisor. "Prepare for immediate debrief upon landing. Corporate is waiting at the gate. Do not attempt to speak to press." Laura's breath hitched. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't know." The reply came like ice. "That's the problem." She pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the counter. Her reflection warped in its sheen. She wondered how many years she had left in this career, how many flights she would ever serve again. The answer felt smaller with every passing minute. The descent tilted the cabin forward, the skyline of New York faintly visible through the dusk outside. Ariana finally unzipped her tote, her fingers brushing the velvet case inside. She didn't remove it, not this time. The seal had spoken already. To wield it again now would be repetition, unnecessary. Still, its presence comforted her, a reminder that she carried not just authority, but responsibility. Leadership, she reminded herself, was not about silencing others. It was about creating the space where silence could be heard for what it was. Diego raised his phone one last time, capturing Ariana in profile against the fading light of the horizon. He didn't add words this time. He didn't need to. The image itself, composed, quiet, dignified, spoke louder than commentary. He sent it to his sister back home with a single message. "This is what strength looks like." As the plane dipped lower, whispers reached a fever pitch. "There are reporters waiting at JFK. The airline already issued a statement. It's going to be chaos." Vivian fidgeted, her patience unraveling. She leaned toward Ariana once more. "Don't you care that this will destroy people's careers?" Ariana finally looked her full in the face, her eyes steady, her voice even. "Care. Yes. Excuse, no. Actions have weight. You don't drop them without consequence." Vivian recoiled slightly, as though struck by the blunt force of calm truth. Laura emerged briefly from the galley, her uniform disheveled, her expression hollow. She walked down the aisle mechanically, checking seat belts, her lips pressed tight. When she passed 2A, she paused involuntarily. For the first time since the tray moment, Her eyes met Ariana's again. She opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg, but Ariana gave the smallest shake of her head. Not now. Not here. Laura's throat closed. She moved on, her steps unsteady. The landing gear thudded into place beneath them, the cabin vibrating with anticipation. Phones buzzed in pockets and purses as signals reconnected. Notifications screamed with headlines. Ariana Miles' confrontation in midair goes viral. Skylark CEO silent but unstoppable. Airline faces reckoning. By the time the wheels touched down and the engines roared in reverse thrust, Ariana's silence had already circled the globe. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers remained still, almost reverent. No one stood to retrieve bags. No one crowded the aisle. It was as though everyone understood they were participants in something larger than an arrival. When the seatbelt sign chimed off, the captain's voice returned, softer than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated for a few moments. Thank you for your cooperation." Heads turned instinctively toward the front. The cabin door opened with a hiss. A supervisor in a sharp suit stepped aboard, flanked by two corporate security officers. His eyes scanned the cabin, landing on 2A. "Ms. Miles," he said softly, "if you'll come with us, there's a private exit prepared. Media presence outside is substantial." Ariana stood, her movements calm and deliberate. She lifted her tote, adjusting the strap across her shoulder. As she stepped into the aisle, the hush deepened. Passing Laura. Ariana paused. Their eyes met one last time. Ariana said nothing, but the silence was louder than any reprimand. Laura felt it carve into her, a reminder she would never outrun. Ariana continued forward, her steps sure, her posture unbroken. The supervisor guided her toward the door, the security officers shielding her from the flashes already visible through the terminal windows. Behind her, whispers erupted, fragments of awe and disbelief. That was the CEO. She didn't even raise her voice. "Did you see the SEAL, a teenage boy, lean toward his father? I want to be like her one day." The father smiled, his voice low. Then remember, power doesn't always shout. As Ariana stepped off the aircraft, the weight of silence followed her. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. She gave none of them the satisfaction of an answer. The SEAL remained tucked in her bag, its echo already louder than any statement she could give. And somewhere in the cabin behind her, passengers began typing, posting, sending their accounts into the world. The ripple had begun, unstoppable now, and Ariana Miles walked forward into the storm knowing she would meet it with the same calm she had carried on board. The blast of air that hit Ariana Miles as she stepped into the jet bridge was thick with the mingled scent of jet fuel and recycled ventilation. Outside, the evening had fallen heavy over JFK, and the runway lights glowed against the damp tarmac. She walked with the quiet assurance of someone who did not need to announce her authority. Two security officers flanked her, shielding her from the flashes already visible through the narrow window slits of the bridge. Reporters pressed at barricades on the far side of the gate. Their voices were muffled but insistent, demanding statements, demanding reactions. Ariana offered them nothing. The supervisor walking ahead spoke without turning. "We'll bring you down the service stairwell to a waiting vehicle. Corporate has dispatched a black SUV. Media are contained at the main exit." His voice was tight, professional, but Ariana could sense the unease underneath. This was no ordinary escort. This was crisis management in real time. She reached the end of the bridge, where a side door led to a staircase enclosed by corrugated metal walls. The air grew cooler as they descended. At the base, the SUV waited, sleek and silent, its tinted windows reflecting the sodium floodlights. A driver in a dark suit stepped forward, opening the rear door with a practiced motion. Ariana slid into the leather interior without hesitation. The door closed behind her with the crisp finality of a gavel strike. Inside, Caleb Ross was waiting. Tablet balanced on his knee, face pale but focused. "It's everywhere," he said without preamble. 7 million views and climbing. Every major outlet has picked it up. We already have requests from NPR, Bloomberg, even late-night shows. Ariana smoothed her sleeve, her expression unreadable, and the bored Caleb hesitated. They won an emergency session. Some directors are worried about liability. Others are calling this a gift, a branding miracle. He exhaled. They're divided. Ariana, half think we exploit this, half think we bury it. The SUV moved smoothly along the service road, bypassing the chaos of the main terminal where cameras crowded behind barricades. Ariana looked out the window, the runway stretching into the night. Planes lifted off one after another, indifferent to human scandal. She envied their simplicity, the way they rose without apology. Caleb studied her. "Do you want me to draft a statement? Even something simple, acknowledge, express regret, promise review." Ariana turned to him slowly. "No statement, not yet." He blinked, but silence only fuels speculation. She gave the faintest smile. Sometimes silence is the statement. Back in the terminal, passengers spilled into the concourse, buzzing with retellings of what they had witnessed. Some replayed the video aloud, showing it to strangers who gathered in clusters, murmuring disbelief. Vivian Cross exited briskly, her heels striking the tile, her phone pressed to her ear. She spoke in urgent tones to a contact at a financial daily, trying to reshape the narrative, but her words sounded defensive, petty, small against the tidal wave of images already flooding feeds. Laura Bennett, however, did not exit with the others. She was pulled aside the moment she left the jet bridge, directed down a separate corridor into a sterile conference room near Gate C-22. A regional HR manager sat across from her, flanked by a legal liaison. Laura's heart pounded as the questions began. "Explain your conduct. Why did you place the tray on a passenger? What led you to assume she was not who she was?" Laura's responses stumbled, half-formed excuses spilling out. It was a joke. "I didn't know. She didn't look like..." The words faltered into silence. The HR manager's expression remained impassive. The lawyer slid a piece of paper across the table. "Effective immediately. You are on administrative leave pending investigation." Laura's mouth went dry. "Please, it was a misunderstanding." The lawyer's voice was cool. Intent does not erase impact. Meanwhile, Ariana's SUV pulled into a private entrance of Skylark Global's Manhattan Tower. Midnight light gleamed against its steel facade. The building loomed with the quiet power of an institution that touched every continent. Ariana stepped out, the seal still tucked inside her tote. Inside the lobby, staff stood awkwardly, unsure whether to greet her or give her space. She acknowledged them with a small nod, then continued to the elevator. Caleb followed, still clutching his tablet like a shield. The boardroom lights were already on when she entered. 11 directors sat at the long glass table, their faces tight with anticipation. The chairman cleared his throat. "Ms. Miles, Eventful flight, I presume. Ariana placed her tote on the polished surface and sat at the head of the table. Eventful, yes, but more revealing than any report you've commissioned this year. Murmurs rippled. A director leaned forward. Public perception is in our favor. Social media is calling you a hero. If anything, this scandal has strengthened our brand. Ariana's gaze was steady. If you think this is about brand, you've already missed the lesson. She reached into her tote and withdrew the velvet case. The directors leaned closer. Though most had seen the seal before, Ariana placed it on the table, the brass catching the recessed light. "This changed nothing," she said softly. "It only revealed what was already broken. That one of our own could humiliate a paying customer without hesitation. That bias has become so instinctive it doesn't even register as wrong until the world is watching. That is the problem." The room fell silent. She tapped her tablet, and the screen behind her lit up with timelines, internal complaints, and ignored reports. It shouldn't take a scandal for us to see what passengers of color have been telling us for years. If this is a gift, it is one wrapped in shame. Another director cleared his throat. "You're proposing reforms." Ariana nodded once. "More than reforms, overhaul, from the top down. Training, accountability, audits, and not outsourced. We take ownership. We set the standard." She paused, her voice lowering. "And we make it clear silence from leadership will never again protect misconduct. It will only amplify truth." Back at JFK, Laura sat alone in the sterile room, her hands trembling. She replayed the image in her mind, the moment Ariana placed the seal on the tray. How the air shifted, how her authority drained in an instant. Laura had spent years believing her uniform conferred power. Now she understood how fragile that illusion was. She buried her face in her hands, but no tears came. Only the heavy realization that her career was already over. In the SUV ride back to her apartment, Ariana finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. She leaned against the seat, eyes closed, the events of the day pressing down like a weight. Caleb spoke softly. "You didn't raise your voice once, and yet the world heard you louder than anyone." Ariana opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the darkened skyline. That's the irony of silence. When it's earned, it doesn't whisper, it echoes. She let the thought hang, her fingers brushing the edge of the velvet case. She did not need to open it again tonight. Its presence was enough. The SUV slowed as it reached her building. Paparazzi lingered outside, but security kept them at bay. Ariana stepped out calmly, her posture unbroken, and walked inside. The storm outside could rage all it wanted. Inside, she carried the same stillness that had silenced an entire cabin. And as she closed her apartment door behind her, she knew the fallout had only begun. Tomorrow, the work of rebuilding would start not just for Skylark Global, but for an industry long overdue for reckoning. The boardroom of Skylark Global was a chamber designed to project authority. Walls of smoked glass muted the chaos of Manhattan beyond, while recessed lights created an atmosphere of order and control. But as Ariana Miles sat at the head of the long table, the quiet hum of the air system sounded more like pressure than calm. 11 directors faced her, some with guarded curiosity, others with visible discomfort. The brass seal she had placed on the table gleamed like a mirror of their unease. Ariana did not speak immediately. She allowed silence to do what it did best: stretch, deepen, force attention. Eventually, The chairman shifted in his seat, his voice gravelly. "Ms. Miles, you've made your point. But let us be practical. What happened on that flight has already been spun into a narrative of resilience. Public perception is favorable. Why pour fuel on the fire with drastic measures? Ariana's eyes did not waver, because perception is not protection. The public may cheer today, but if we do nothing, the same culture that allowed Laura Bennett to treat me as disposable will humiliate another passenger tomorrow. And next time, there may be no seal to remind the world who is watching." One of the directors, a silver-haired man with a reputation for pragmatism, leaned forward. "So, what do you propose?" "We fire the attendant, release a statement, and move on." His tone was casual, as if she were suggesting a routine expense adjustment. Ariana's gaze hardened. This is not about scapegoating one attendant. This is about systems that make bias instinctive. This is about an environment that shrugs at disrespect until it explodes into scandal. She tapped her tablet, and the screen on the far wall lit up with charts, timelines, and redacted reports. Internal complaints ignored. Diversity training outsourced to the lowest bidder. Passenger feedback flagged but never escalated. Dozens of moments where dignity was eroded in silence. You call this an isolated incident, I call it a culture. The images scrolled photos of passengers of color who had filed complaints, quotes from emails that were quietly dismissed, metrics showing disproportionate detainments and denials of service. The directors shifted, some frowning, others avoiding her gaze. Ariana's voice lowered, steady but sharp. "We sell trust every time a passenger buys a ticket. If they cannot trust us to see them as human, what exactly are we selling?" A murmur of unease rippled around the table. Caleb Ross, standing quietly near the wall, watched as Ariana's stillness worked its force. She did not raise her voice. She did not pound the table. Yet every director sat as if pinned in place. A woman at the far end finally spoke. "What, then, is your solution? You're asking for overhaul. Overhaul of what?" Ariana leaned back slightly, her composure unbroken. "Everything. We begin with training designed in-house, not farmed out to consultants who treat empathy as a checkbox. We create an independent audit team that reviews passenger interactions monthly. We implement protocols that empower crew to pause before escalating, to ask again instead of assume, and we make accountability public. Not in the tabloids, not in viral clips, but in our own systems. This will be called the Seal Point Initiative." The chairman raised an eyebrow. Seal Point. Ariana placed her hand gently on the brass emblem in front of her. Named for the moment the world forced us to look in the mirror, a point at which silence became too loud to ignore. She let her hand rest on the seal for a beat, then withdrew it. The directors exchanged glances. Some whispered to each other. One finally spoke, voice skeptical. "You do realize what you're suggesting could provoke union resistance. It will be costly, time-consuming. Shareholders may not appreciate ideals cutting into profit margins." Ariana's gaze was cool. Shareholders care about longevity. Scandal is expensive. Lawsuits are expensive. Brand erosion is expensive. The cost of ignoring this will far exceed the cost of fixing it. And if profit is all that matters, then perhaps you have forgotten what this company was built to be. The room fell quiet again. Ariana sensed the battle lines forming. She knew some of them would resist until their last vote. She also knew silence had already shifted the balance outside these walls. Millions of people had seen what dignity looked like under fire, and they would not unsee it. The board could either ride the wave or drown beneath it. She softened her tone, her voice carrying weight without force. This is not just about me. It is about every passenger who sat in silence because they knew their complaint would disappear. It is about every employee who wanted to do the right thing but feared reprisal. This initiative is not charity. It is survival. For them and for us. A director who had been quiet until now cleared his throat. He was younger, newly appointed, more attuned to the shifting landscape. "I think she's right," he said cautiously. "This is not a fad. This is the future. The question is whether Skylark leads or lags." His words gave others permission to nod, to consider, to lean forward. The chairman sighed, drumming his fingers on the table. And if the unions revolt, if staff reject this as overreach, Ariana answered without hesitation, then let them. This is not about job security. It is about moral clarity. Those who cannot uphold it are free to leave. The boldness of her answer settled like a stone. For a long moment, no one spoke. The seal on the table seemed to pulse with unspoken gravity. Ariana finally broke the silence. "We vote tonight. Either we choose reform, or we choose to be remembered as the board that hid behind profit while dignity crumbled. I know where I stand." The directors shifted again. Some whispered to aides. Some stared at the gleaming brass on the table. One by one, the votes were cast. When the tally was complete, the chairman looked at Ariana, his face unreadable. "The Seal Point initiative is approved, effective immediately." Relief did not show on Ariana's face. She simply nodded, as if the outcome had always been inevitable. But inside, she felt the first crack of release. Not victory. Not yet, but movement. The kind of movement that could shift an entire industry if nurtured carefully. The meeting adjourned, directors filing out into the Manhattan night with furrowed brows and muttered calculations. Ariana remained seated, her fingers brushing the seal once more before she returned it to the velvet case. Caleb approached quietly. "That was seismic," he murmured. She met his gaze. "Seismic is only the beginning. Now comes the rebuild." As they left the tower together, the city buzzed outside, indifferent to the decisions made in its glass towers. But Ariana knew the echo of tonight's vote would not remain contained. By morning, reforms would ripple outward. Staff would whisper, unions would stir, and passengers would watch. And she would be ready for the resistance. Because the silence of one cabin had already changed the sound of the sky, and she intended to make sure it kept echoing. The morning after the boardroom vote, the city awoke to a storm of headlines. Every major news outlet carried the same image: Ariana Miles in seat 2A, the brass seal gleaming on the tray table like a torch of quiet rebellion. Cable anchors spoke with urgency. Podcasts dissected the symbolism, and think pieces flooded digital feeds. One headline read, "The Seal Heard Around the World." Another called her moment the most powerful act of corporate resistance in a decade. In airports across the country, passengers whispered about it in security lines. Flight crews exchanged nervous glances during briefings. Ground staff scrolled through their phones on breaks, watching the clip over and over, debating what it meant for them. The silence Ariana had carried into that cabin was no longer confined to a single plane. It had gone airborne. Ariana herself did not appear on camera. She refused interviews, declined press conferences, and issued no personal statements. Instead, a short message appeared on Skylark Global's official channels, effective immediately. Skylark launches the Seal Point Initiative, a comprehensive reform of policies, training, and accountability across all divisions. No slogans, no spin, just a declaration. The restraint frustrated journalists who craved sound bites, but it fascinated the public even more. In the absence of her words, the video did the speaking. Clips spread on social media with captions like, "Power in stillness and dignity without a word." Millions who had never heard of Skylark Global before now associated its name with a single brass seal. Inside corporate offices, tension was thick. Emails poured in from staff, some praising Ariana's courage, others fearful about what reforms would mean. Union leaders scheduled emergency meetings. Supervisors tried to answer questions they did not have answers for. At one hub in Dallas, a group of flight attendants gathered in a break room, whispering heatedly. "She made us look like villains," one said bitterly. Another shook her head. "No, Laura made us look like villains. Ariana just showed the world." The debate ended in silence, uneasy but undeniable. Meanwhile, Ariana sat in her office overlooking the Hudson, reading the flood of reports Marcus delivered to her tablet. Passenger feedback spiked overnight. Some expressed outrage at the crew's behavior, others awe at Ariana's composure. A letter from a mother who had watched the video with her teenage daughter caught Ariana's attention. "My girl said she wants to grow up like the woman in 2A. She said silence doesn't mean weakness. Thank you for showing her that." Ariana read it twice before placing the letter gently in her drawer. Still, not all responses were admiration. Editorials surfaced questioning her motives. Was this a power play, they asked? A CEO using humiliation to force reform. An op-ed in a financial journal sneered. Profit should drive airlines, not principles. Others accused her of performative activism, claiming the seal was nothing more than a theatrical stunt. Ariana read these pieces without flinching. She had expected resistance. What mattered was not the noise of detractors but the clarity of what came next. Late that week, Ariana convened a closed-door session with her senior leadership team. The air was thick with anticipation. Marcus began with a summary. Public trust index is up. Stock wavered for a day but has recovered. Customer satisfaction ratings are climbing, but unions are mobilizing, demanding clarity on whether Seal Point means job cuts. He looked at Ariana. "We need to decide how much transparency to give." Ariana folded her hands. "Give them all of it. Every protocol, every expectation. This is not punishment. It is a recalibration. If they fear that, perhaps they should ask why." Her tone was steady, but Marcus saw the fatigue around her eyes. She carried herself with composure, but the weight of an entire industry now pressed on her shoulders. That night, as she returned to her apartment, Ariana allowed herself a moment of solitude. She set the seal on her coffee table, not to brandish, but to remember. She poured a glass of water, sat in silence, and let her mind drift. For a fleeting second, doubt whispered. Had she gone too far, would the reforms hold, or would they collapse under resistance? She closed her eyes, breathing slowly. In the stillness, she remembered the teenage boy on the plane who had whispered to his mother that she was like a secret boss. That memory anchored her. The struggle was worth it. By the following week, the story had entered classrooms. Teachers used the viral clip as a case study in ethics and leadership. A high school civics teacher in Chicago played it for his students. Pausing at the moment, Ariana placed the seal on the tray. "What do you see here?" he asked. A girl raised her hand. She didn't have to yell. She just reminded everyone who she was. The teacher nodded. "And what does that say about dignity?" Silence filled the room. The lesson, embedding deeper than words, could. Skylark's competitors watched nervously. Executives at rival airlines debated whether to implement their own reforms. Some dismissed Seal Point as a PR gimmick, but others quietly admitted Ariana had shifted the standard. One CEO confided to a colleague, "If we don't adapt, we'll be the next headline." The media frenzy intensified when a popular talk show invited Ariana to appear. She declined. When pressed, Skylark's PR office responded simply, "Miles believes her silence has already spoken." The refusal only fueled intrigue. Clips of Ariana walking through JFK, composed and silent, became viral in their own right. Commentators marveled at how a woman could seize global attention without uttering a single public word. Not everyone was content to marvel. At the Dallas hub, Laura Bennett sat in a sterile HR office, hands trembling. She had been suspended pending investigation. Her lawyer whispered to her to remain silent, but Laura's mind churned. She replayed the flight in her head, searching for justification. It was a joke, she told herself again. A joke. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had seen Ariana as less, and the world had seen it too. In the weeks that followed, reforms began rolling out. Crews attended intensive workshops. Supervisors submitted monthly reports. A new team of auditors conducted surprise evaluations. Some staff embraced the changes. Others resisted quietly, muttering about overreach. Ariana visited hubs unannounced, watching interactions, observing without spectacle. Her presence was calm but unmistakable. Word spread quickly she could appear at any gate, any terminal. That knowledge alone shifted behavior. Meanwhile, outside the company, the public response hardened into something more permanent. Consumer watchdog groups praised Skylark for setting a precedent. Activists called for other airlines to adopt similar measures. Politicians began citing Seal Point as a model for corporate responsibility. One senator even referenced Ariana's silent act during a congressional hearing on passenger rights. Through it all, Ariana remained the same, reserved, deliberate, carrying herself with quiet force. Marcus once asked her late at night why she never gave interviews, never defended herself publicly. Ariana looked out at the city lots and answered softly, "Because the moment was never about me. It was about reminding people that dignity doesn't require permission. If I speak too much, I risk making it mine when it belongs to everyone." Her words stayed with him, as they stayed with many who had witnessed her steadiness. What had begun as a humiliating encounter with a tray of meals had transformed into a cultural shift, not because she shouted, not because she demanded, but because she chose to stand still in the storm and let silence amplify the truth. By the end of the quarter, Skylark's internal surveys showed something unprecedented. Not only had complaints of discrimination decreased, but compliments had risen. Passengers wrote notes thanking crews for kindness. Employees reported feeling more supported. A gate agent wrote simply, "The seal reminded me why I joined." Ariana read that note and smiled. It was working. And yet she knew the battle was far from over. Cultures do not change overnight. Resistance still brewed, both within and beyond the company. But as she walked through a crowded terminal one Friday evening, a child pointed at her and whispered, "That's the lady from the plane." The mother hushed him, but Ariana smiled faintly. She did not stop. She did not wave. She simply kept walking, carrying the seal tucked quietly in her bag, its weight steady against her side. The world was listening now. Not because she demanded it, but because she had reminded them of something ancient. Something simple respect was not optional, and once remembered, it could not be forgotten. The weeks after Seal Point launched felt like a storm within Skylark Global. Policies that had once been comfortable routines were suddenly questioned, reshaped, or discarded. Supervisors carried binders full of new protocols. Line staff sat in mandatory training sessions. And every level of the airline was forced to face something they had avoided for years: how they treated people when no one was watching. At the corporate headquarters in Manhattan, Ariana Miles read progress reports each morning while the city was still dark outside her window. Caleb Ross sat across from her, tapping through metrics on his tablet. "Passenger compliments have doubled since the initiative began," he said, glancing up, "but resistance is growing. We've had several senior flight attendants push back. Some say Seal Point feels like punishment instead of progress." Ariana leaned back in her chair, fingers pressed lightly together. She had expected this. Change always carried a cost. "Send me the names," she said quietly, not to discipline, to listen, true to her word. Ariana boarded flights unannounced, often in the middle of busy routes, sometimes in economy, sometimes in first class, always watching. Her presence rattled crews, not because she demanded authority, but because she asked simple questions. How do you feel when you serve? What do you do when you doubt a passenger's word? Do you pause before deciding? The questions lingered long after she stepped off the plane. One late evening at the Dallas hub, Ariana gathered a group of supervisors in a small conference room. Laura Bennett sat among them, her uniform crisp, her eyes sharp but weary. She had been reinstated for the time being, pending full review, and though she tried to mask her tension, Ariana could feel it. "Seal Point is not about fear," Ariana began, her voice calm. "It is about clarity. If you fear it, perhaps you're afraid of what it reveals." Laura shifted in her chair, unable to meet her eyes. Another supervisor raised a hand. "Our crews are saying passengers expect perfection now. They're scared one mistake will go viral." Ariana nodded slowly. "Mistakes are human. Patterns are not. Seal Point is about patterns, not perfection. If you can explain your choice with dignity, you will stand. If you cannot, you will fall." Her words landed heavy. Some nodded, others looked away. Laura's jaw tightened. Outside that room, the airline was shifting in small, visible ways. Passengers noticed flight attendants taking more time to greet them. Gate agents paused to confirm identities without assumptions. Even baggage handlers began adjusting procedures after noticing Ariana's visits. The cultural shift was subtle but real, a ripple that unsettled some and inspired others. But resistance hardened in corners Ariana could not ignore. Anonymous forums buzzed with resentment. One post read, "Seal Point is corporate theater. We're being turned into actors in someone else's play." Another accused Ariana of weaponizing her silence to make crews look small. The bitterness stung, not because it was untrue, but because Ariana feared some staff genuinely believed it. Caleb noticed her unease one night as they walked out of headquarters. "You're carrying their doubt like it's yours," he said gently. Ariana stopped at the curb, the city's lights painting her face in fragments. Because maybe it is mine. Maybe I didn't explain enough. Maybe they see me as a judge when I only wanted to be a mirror. Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder. Mirrors are uncomfortable. They always have been, but they are necessary. She nodded, but said nothing more. The next morning, Ariana requested a closed listening session, not with executives, not with supervisors, but with frontline staff. She entered a modest training room at JFK where a dozen flight attendants, gate agents, and ground workers sat stiffly in metal chairs. No cameras, no press, just Ariana with a notebook in her lap. "I'm not here to defend Seal Point," she said plainly. "I'm here to hear what it feels like to you." At first, silence. Then a young gate agent spoke. "I used to think pausing meant weakness, like if I hesitated, passengers would lose trust. But now I see it differently. It gives me time to confirm. It saved me from wrongly pulling a family aside last week." A baggage handler added, "For me, it's about respect. Nobody ever asked us how we feel when passengers snap at us. Seal Point training did." But then Laura Bennett spoke, her voice steady but edged. "With all respect, Ms. Miles, it feels like you're telling us we were all wrong before, that we've been villains. I've given 15 years of service. One mistake and I'm branded forever." The room fell quiet. Ariana looked at her, eyes steady, voice soft. "Laura, you're not branded by one mistake, but you're remembered by how you respond to it. The seal was never about you. It was about what we tolerated. If you choose to rise, you rise with us. If you choose not to, the choice will still be yours." Laura's lips pressed into a line. She looked down at her hands, torn between shame and defiance. The session ended with no applause, no resolution. Yet Ariana felt something shift. The resistance was still there, but the silence afterward carried less hostility, more reflection. Outside the room, Diego Ruiz, the law student who had witnessed the flight, approached Ariana. He had been invited as an observer by the training team. "You don't realize how much it matters that you listen," he said. "Most leaders talk. You listen. That's what makes a difference." Ariana gave him a small smile. Listening is the only way silence has weight. Meanwhile, the media narrative shifted again. Reports highlighted small victories, a passenger praising a crew for de-escalating a tense confrontation. A ground agent praised for preventing a wrongful detainment of a disabled traveler. Headlines began to call Seal Point more than a policy. It was a culture shift, yet inside Ariana's mind, questions stirred. Could this culture survive her presence? Or was it only strong because of the fear of being watched in the quiet of her office? She stared at the seal in its velvet case. She remembered the moment on the plane, the laughter that turned to whispers, the way silence filled the cabin. That was the power she had carried. But could an institution carry it without her? Caleb found her that evening, still staring at the seal. "You're thinking about legacy," he said. "I'm thinking about permanence." Ariana replied, "I don't want this to end when I leave the room. Then build it so the room doesn't need you," Caleb said simply. The words lingered with her long into the night. By the end of the month, the tide began to turn. Resistance softened. not because everyone agreed, but because results were undeniable. Passenger satisfaction climbed, complaints of bias dropped significantly, and slowly, even skeptics began to admit Seal Point had merit. But Laura Bennett remained unsettled. She felt the weight of judgment everywhere she turned, whispers in break rooms, glances in terminals, the constant reminder that she had been at the center of the scandal. One evening, she sat alone in her apartment, replaying the viral video again. Ariana's silence, the seal on the tray, her own smirk frozen forever on screen. She pressed her palms to her eyes, whispering, I didn't know, and yet deep down, she did. That truth haunted her more than any punishment. As the quarter closed, Ariana prepared to present Seal Point's first comprehensive results to the board. She knew numbers alone would not define success. What mattered was whether culture had shifted, whether silence had become a practice, not just a moment. She closed her binder, tucked the seal into her tote, and walked toward the boardroom. The turning tide was still turbulent, but she was ready to meet it, because silence had never meant surrender. It had always meant strength. The boardroom at Skylark Global gleamed under recessed lighting, its glass walls overlooking Manhattan's restless skyline. Ariana Miles entered without haste, the seal tucked away in her tote as always. She carried no theatrics, only presence. The directors shifted in their seats as she took her place at the head of the long mahogany table. Caleb Ross sat discreetly at her right, tablet in hand, his calm expression masking nerves. Let's begin, Ariana said softly. 3 words, but they steadied the room. Charts and figures glowed on the large screen. Complaints of bias had dropped by 31% in 2 months. Passenger compliments were up by nearly half. Social media sentiment shifted from scandal to admiration. Still, Ariana knew numbers alone could not tell the story. This initiative was never about optics, she said, her gaze sweeping across the directors. It is about the lives that move through our cabins and terminals. Every decision we make leaves a mark, either a wound or a scar that heals. One director, an older man with silver hair and folded arms, leaned forward. Results are promising, but the unions are restless. Flight crews are whispering that Seal Point is punitive, that it paints them as guilty before proven otherwise. If this turns into open resistance, we face operational risk. Ariana's jaw tightened. She had anticipated this. Seal Point is not punishment, it is reflection. If they feel accused, it is because the mirror shows something they did not wish to see. Another director, younger, with a sharp suit and sharper tone, interjected. But perception matters as much as intention. If staff believe this is theater, then theater becomes reality. The room hummed with unease. Caleb shifted, ready to pull up more supportive data, but Ariana raised a hand gently. Silence filled the boardroom, not awkward, but deliberate. Finally, she spoke. You're right. Perception matters, which is why accountability must be seen, not hidden. She paused. That is why today, I'm announcing the first set of disciplinary outcomes. The room stirred. Ariana opened her binder. 6 employees, including supervisors, have been found in repeated violation of our dignity protocols. Patterns of dismissive behavior, bias in seating assignments, failure to assist passengers with disabilities. These are not mistakes. These are choices, and those choices have consequences. She slid the papers across the table. Effective immediately. Their contracts are terminated. The words dropped heavy. Some directors exhaled in relief. Others stiffened, fearing backlash. Ariana's voice remained calm. Transparency is not optional. I want every termination letter archived internally and referenced in future training modules. Staff must know this is not a hidden purge. It is accountability. The silver-haired director frowned. This will inflame the union. You may start a war. Ariana met his eyes steadily. Better a war for dignity than a peace built on silence. The meeting continued with murmurs, shifting strategies, cautious approvals. Yet Ariana knew the real reckoning would not happen in this room. It would happen in terminals, in galleys, in the daily choices of crews who now understood the cost of their actions. Later that evening, Ariana sat alone in her office, the city below buzzing with its usual chaos. She thought of Laura Bennett, still under review. She thought of Diego Ruiz, the young law student who had witnessed the flight and continued to reach out, offering perspective from the passenger's side. She thought of Vivian Cross, the passenger in 2B who had once dismissed her with careless entitlement, now silent in every public thread. These names lived in her mind not as enemies, but as lessons. Her phone buzzed. Caleb's voice came through, steady but urgent. "We have a problem. The Flight Attendants Union just released a statement. They accuse Skylark Global of scapegoating staff for systemic failures. They are threatening to walk out unless you meet with them directly." Ariana closed her eyes for a moment. She knew this would come. Silence had power, but it also stirred fear, and fear often disguised itself as defiance. "Set the meeting," she said quietly. The union gathering took place in a cavernous hall near JFK. Hundreds of staff filled folding chairs, their expressions tense, their voices low and bristling. Signs bore slogans like "Protect our crews" and "No to corporate scapegoating." Ariana walked to the stage without an escort. She wore a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back, her tote at her side. The murmurs swelled as she approached the microphone. Some booed softly, others sat rigid, arms crossed. Ariana waited until the noise ebbed. She did not raise her voice. "I came here to listen," she said, "not to lecture. But first let me be clear. Seal Point is not a weapon against you. It is a shield for those you serve, and for you when you stand in dignity." A flight attendant shouted from the floor. "Then why are our colleagues losing their jobs?" 15 years of service gone in a headline. Ariana's gaze found the voice. It was a man in his 40s, his hands trembling as he clutched a Union flyer. She spoke directly to him. Because service years cannot erase repeated choices that harmed others. We honor loyalty, but loyalty does not excuse harm. If someone mocked you for your accent, would you want their years to protect them from consequence? The man faltered. Silence stretched. Another voice rose. "We're scared of being recorded, scared of making one wrong move." Ariana nodded slowly. "You should not be scared of being recorded. You should be confident that any recording will reflect dignity. That is the culture I'm asking you to build. Not fear, confidence." The hall quieted. People shifted in their seats, some murmuring agreement, others still resistant. Ariana stepped back from the microphone. "Now I will listen." For the next 2 hours, she sat while workers spoke anger, fear, confusion, and even gratitude spilled into the room. Ariana wrote nothing down, but her eyes held each speaker, her silence carrying weight. By the end, voices had softened, not agreement, not acceptance, but a recognition that she had faced them without shield or stage. Afterward, Diego Ruiz approached her outside the hall. He had been invited as an independent observer by a civil rights group. "They may not love you," he said, "but they believe you now. That matters more." Ariana exhaled, her shoulders easing. Belief is enough. Love can wait. The next morning, news outlets covered the meeting. Headlines read, "CEO faces, union without a word of defense, and Miles turns protest into dialogue." Public sentiment tilted further in her favor. Though Ariana barely looked at the articles, she was already thinking ahead. Back at headquarters, she gathered her leadership team. "We will not retreat," she said, "but we will adapt. Seal Point cannot be top-down only. It must be co-owned." She outlined a plan. Each base would elect staff representatives to join the Seal Point Council. They would review protocols, suggest changes, and hold leadership accountable as much as leadership held them. "If this is to endure," Ariana said, "it must belong to all of us." Caleb watched her with quiet pride. He knew the cost of what she was carrying, the weight of being both leader and symbol. Later that night, he found her in her office, staring again at the seal. "You look tired," he said gently. "I am," she admitted, "but tiredness is not defeat. It's proof that the work is real." Caleb smiled. "You know, sometimes I wonder if you regret not lashing out that day on the plane, if it would have been easier." Ariana's eyes softened. "Easier? Maybe, but easier never built anything worth keeping." Outside, Manhattan pulsed with neon and noise. Inside, Ariana placed the seal back in its velvet case, not because she was finished with it, but because its work was ongoing. The reckoning had begun, not through shouting, not through retaliation, but through the steady, unflinching choice to demand better. And Ariana Miles knew this was only the beginning. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow as Skylark Flight 982 leveled off above the Atlantic. Ariana Miles sat in 2A, her tote tucked neatly beneath the seat, her posture steady as the hum of the engines filled the silence. She was returning from Geneva, where she had spoken quietly with regulators about expanding the Seal Point framework beyond airlines. It had not been a speech, only a conversation. But already whispers about her words were circulating across Europe. Tonight, she wanted nothing more than stillness. But the air inside the plane felt restless, alive with undercurrents. A flight attendant pushed a cart down the aisle, her smile strained, her movements quick. Ariana noticed the way her eyes darted nervously between passengers. Something was unsettled. In 2B sat a man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, expensive watch glinting under the cabin light. He had boarded late, his voice loud from the moment he stepped into the cabin. Now, he leaned into the aisle, gesturing impatiently. "Where's my whiskey?" I asked 20 minutes ago. The attendant murmured an apology and hurried back toward the galley. Ariana kept her gaze on the window, but her mind was sharp. She had seen this pattern countless times, entitlement brewing into escalation. Minutes later, the attendant returned with a glass balanced on a napkin. She placed it gently on his tray. He took one sip, then slammed it down. "This is watered down." "Do you people not understand?" Service passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. The woman in 3A pressed her lips together, avoiding eye contact. A couple in 1C and 1D whispered softly to each other. The tension spread like turbulence through still air. The man in 2B sneered and snapped his fingers toward the galley. "Get me someone competent." And while you're at it, tell her he jerked his thumb toward Ariana to stop pretending she belongs here. You can tell when someone bought their way in with points. I pay for this seat with real money." A chill swept through the cabin. The attendant froze, her eyes flicking to Ariana, unsure how to respond. Ariana did not flinch. Her breathing remained steady. She folded her hands on her lap, gazing out at the darkness beyond the glass. Inside, though, a storm flickered. She knew this moment mattered, not just for her, but for every silent witness. The man leaned closer. "You hear me? I've flown Skylark for 20 years. First class isn't charity, it's earned." Finally, Ariana turned her head. Her eyes met his, calm and unwavering. She did not speak. The silence unsettled him. He chuckled, trying to cover his discomfort. "What?" "Nothing to say." "Figures." From the galley, another attendant appeared, joined by the lead purser. Their expressions were taut, caught between policy and fear of escalation. Ariana recognized the hesitation. It was the same hesitation that had once allowed Laura Bennett to press a tray into her lap. But tonight was different. Tonight, Ariana carried not just a seal, but a precedent. The purser cleared her throat. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice. You are disturbing other passengers." The man's laugh was sharp. "Disturbing? I'm the customer here. She's the one disturbing me just by sitting there pretending she belongs." The words hung heavy. A young passenger in 4C raised a phone discreetly. Another leaned forward, eyes wide. The scene was being documented, whether the crew liked it or not. Ariana reached down, slowly, deliberately. She unzipped her tote. The faint metallic click as she opened the velvet case seemed louder than the engines. She lifted the seal, its brass head catching the cabin light, and placed it on her tray table with precision. The effect was immediate. Whispers rippled down the aisle. A passenger in 3C leaned toward his companion, whispering, "That's the Skylark seal. Only the CEO carries it." The purser's eyes widened, realization dawning. The attendant beside her nearly dropped the service cloth she was holding. The man in 2B blinked. His bravado faltered. "What? What is that supposed to be?" No one answered. They did not need to. The cabin had already answered for her. Phones angled toward the light glinting off the brass. The silence grew dense, charged, impossible to escape. Finally, a voice from behind broke the hush. It was Diego Ruiz. He had boarded quietly in economy, upgraded at the last minute by a sympathetic agent who recognized his name. Now he spoke from row 4. "You should probably stop talking," Diego said evenly. "Every word you add is another nail in your own coffin." The man's face reddened. "This is ridiculous. Some kind of stunt." He turned to the purser. "Tell her to put that away. She's intimidating me." The purser swallowed hard. Then, in a voice low but resolute, she replied, "She doesn't need to put it away. You need to calm down." The reversal landed like a gavel. Gasps fluttered through the cabin. Ariana's eyes remained on the man. She still had not spoken a word. The man shifted in his seat, sweat beginning to bead at his temple. His voice cracked as he muttered, This can't be real." "Can it?" A woman across the aisle answered for him. "It's real. I saw that seal at the shareholders' summit last spring. That's Ariana Miles. She runs Skylark." The truth spread like wildfire through the rows. "It's her," someone whispered. "She's the one from the video." The man in 2B slumped back. Silence finally stealing the bluster from his mouth, Ariana lifted the seal gently, placed it back into its case, and closed her tote. The gesture was final, measured, undeniable. The purser exhaled shakily. "Miss Miles, She faltered, unsure what to say. Ariana's gaze softened. "Do your job," she said quietly, her first words of the night, calm and clear. The purser straightened, nodding firmly. "Sir," she said to the man in 2B, her tone sharpened with new authority. "Any further misconduct will result in immediate report to federal authorities upon landing. Do you understand?" His lips parted, then closed. He nodded once, defeated. The cabin exhaled collectively, as if a storm had passed. Passengers shifted, phones lowered, eyes still wide. Ariana leaned back against her seat, her breathing steady once more. The rest of the flight moved in uneasy quiet. Service continued, meals distributed, lights dimmed further for rest. Yet the energy in the cabin remained taut, as though every passenger carried the weight of what they had witnessed. Hours later, as the plane descended toward New York, Ariana's phone buzzed with notifications. She ignored them. She already knew what they were. The footage had spread again. Another seal moment. Another ripple. As the wheels touched down and the cabin lights brightened, Ariana gathered her tote. She looked once more at the man in 2B. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale. She felt no triumph, only a quiet sadness. Entitlement had nearly torn the cabin apart, but silence, once again, had steadied it. At the gate, federal officers waited discreetly, summoned mid-flight by the captain. They approached the man, speaking in low voices. He resisted briefly, then allowed himself to be escorted off. Passengers watched in silence as Ariana stood. She adjusted her blazer, lifted her tote, and stepped into the aisle. A murmur rose, not applause, but respect, something deeper. One voice, soft but clear, spoke from the back. She didn't have to shout. She never does. And with that, Ariana Miles walked off the plane, her seal secured, her silence intact, her message carried forward not by her words, but by the echo she had left behind. The sun had barely risen over Manhattan when Ariana Miles entered Skylark Global Headquarters. The lobby was quiet, the kind of morning calm that felt like a held breath before the day began. She moved through it without a word. The echo of her footsteps steady against the marble floor. It had been 2 days since Flight 982 and the world had already spun itself into another frenzy. Headlines declared her silent defiance the defining corporate moment of the year. Clips flooded social media, dissected frame by frame. Commentators argued over whether silence was strategy or instinct. Employees whispered about how quickly corporate issued statements of reform. And through it all, Ariana remained composed, refusing interviews, declining panel invites, avoiding cameras. She knew the real work began where the noise ended. In the boardroom upstairs, the directors were waiting. Their faces carried the weight of both admiration and unease. They had seen the footage, too, many more than once. The chairman cleared his throat as Ariana took her seat. "Miss Miles," he began carefully, "we find ourselves once again at the center of the world's attention. The question is what to do with it." Ariana folded her hands, pausing before speaking. "We do what we promised. We make Seal Point more than policy. We make it instinct." One director frowned, but the unions are already bristling. They claim these reforms create an impossible standard for staff. Ariana's voice was calm. "The only impossible standard is dignity. If our crews fear empathy, then we have failed them. If our policies punish hesitation more than harm, we have failed our passengers. The room grew still. It was not just her words, but the certainty beneath them. She was not speaking from reaction. She was speaking from resolve. Caleb Ross entered quietly, a tablet in his hands. He set it on the table, the screen lighting up with data. Customer satisfaction rose 12 points in the last 72 hours. Employee retention inquiries doubled. We are seeing unsolicited compliments logged in the system for the first time. The numbers spoke louder than any headline. The directors exchanged glances. Slowly, resistance began to soften. "We codify it," Ariana said, "not as an initiative, but as doctrine. Every decision, every policy, every contract filtered through one question. Does it preserve dignity?" There was a long silence. Then, one by one, heads nodded. By afternoon, a memo circulated through every branch of Skylark Global. Effective immediately. Seal Point was no longer a program but a permanent operational principle. Training manuals were rewritten, orientation scripts adjusted, cabin crew briefings updated, and at the bottom of the memo, one line in Ariana's hand read, "No one should need a SEAL to be treated with respect." The ripple was immediate. In Chicago, a gate agent pinned the memo above her desk. In Dallas, a baggage handler folded it into his pocket like a pledge. In Seattle, a pilot read it aloud to his crew before departure. The effect was not grand or loud, but steady, a current threading itself through the company's veins. Yet Ariana knew better than anyone that culture was not shifted by memos alone. It was carried in the quiet choices made daily, unseen and unrecorded. Weeks later, she walked through JFK Terminal alone, blending into the crowd. She paused near Gate 17 where a young attendant was struggling with a passenger whose ticket had glitched. The passenger was angry, his voice rising. The attendant, visibly nervous, reached for the radio. Then, almost as if remembering something, she stopped. She took a breath, smiled softly, and said, "Let's check this together, step by step." The man's shoulders eased. Within minutes, the issue was resolved. No shouting, no escalation, no scene. Ariana smiled faintly and walked on, unseen. That was Seal Point at work, at Skylark headquarters. A small archive was created on the leadership floor. Inside, beneath glass, lay Ariana's original seal resting in its velvet case. Beside it, not a plaque of glory, but a series of handwritten notes collected from staff across the company. Notes of apology, notes of gratitude, notes of change. Above them hung a simple line etched into the wall. Used once, echoed always. Ariana did not visit often. When she did, she lingered not on the seal, but on the letters. A janitor who had spoken up for a passenger overlooked. A trainee who had chosen patience over protocol. A veteran pilot who admitted his silence once cost someone dignity and vowed never again. These were the true artifacts, more powerful than brass or wood. Still, the outside world demanded narrative. Documentaries were filmed. Business schools drafted case studies. Politicians cited her actions and speeches about corporate accountability. Activists debated whether silence should ever be strategy. Through it all, Ariana refused to engage in performance. She continued flying commercially, often in coach, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes not. She walked terminals, spoke softly with staff, listened more than she spoke. Caleb once asked her, late one evening as they reviewed another wave of requests from universities and governments, Do you ever regret that moment on the plane? Do you wish you had spoken instead? Ariana looked at him for a long time before replying. No, because silence is what they least expected, and sometimes what they least expect is what they most remember. Caleb nodded, understanding more in her pause than in her words. Months turned into a year. Seal Point spread beyond Skylark. Regional airlines adopted variations. A hospital in Boston borrowed its principles for patient care. A school district in California used its framework for conflict mediation. Each adaptation carried its own name, but the heartbeat was the same. Pause, verify, respect, restore. One evening, Ariana received a letter at her apartment. The handwriting was shaky, the envelope worn. Inside was a single page. I was in 4C on Flight 982. I had my phone raised. I wanted to post it for views. But what I saw changed me. I put my phone down. I realized silence could be louder than any video. Thank you. No signature, just that. Ariana folded the letter gently and placed it in the drawer beside the others she had collected. Witness, pause, refuse, repair, choose, echo. The 6 words she carried like a private creed. In time. Ariana began stepping back from the forefront. Priya, a sharp young data scientist promoted through Skylark's equity program, assumed more leadership. Ariana traveled less for business and more for observation. Still walking gates, still riding midnight shifts, still listening. She believed leadership was not about presence, but about the echoes left behind. And so the story of the seal became less about Ariana Miles and more about what people chose to do when given silence. Crews taught new hires by asking not what the seal was, but what they would place on the tray if the moment were theirs. The answers varied empathy, patience, courage, apology. The truth was not in the object, but in the choice. On the anniversary of Flight 982, Ariana attended a quiet ceremony at a training center in Atlanta. No cameras, no media, only staff. A class of new cabin crew stood in crisp uniforms, nerves showing in their posture. Ariana stepped forward, her voice calm. You don't know me. You don't need to. What matters is this. Your silence is not emptiness. It is a choice. Make it wisely. She stepped back, leaving them with the echo rather than applause. That night, as she returned home, Ariana placed the seal back in its cabinet. She touched the velvet briefly, then closed the drawer. The object had done its work. The echo would outlast her. Years later, when her name appeared less in headlines and more in footnotes, when her hair silvered and her steps slowed, Ariana still carried the memory of that tray, not as a burden, but as proof. Proof that dignity could reset a room. Proof that silence could reorder power. Proof that sometimes the smallest gesture could shift the largest system. The seal was only wood and brass, but in her hands, on that night at 30,000 feet, it became something else. A mirror, a reckoning, a beginning, and long after she stopped flying, long after her seal was placed in archives and textbooks, passengers still whispered the lesson, power does not always raise its voice. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it watches, and sometimes it acts with the quiet certainty of a seal placed on a tray. Sometimes the loudest power is not in what we say, but in what we refuse to accept. Ariana Miles never shouted. She never demanded. She placed a seal on a tray and let the world reveal its own reflection. Her story is more than a viral clip. It is a reminder that bias lives in silence, but so does courage. It shows us that dignity does not beg for permission, It stands, steady, even when unseen. For the crew member who mocked her, this was a reckoning. For the passengers who witnessed it, this was a lesson. And for us, watching now, it is a call to look closer at the ways prejudice hides in plain sight at airports, in offices, in daily life. We are left with two choices: to look away or to pause and act differently the next time respect is tested. Because change does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly. One seal, one pause, one decision at a time. If this story moved you, let it travel further. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of dignity, courage, and silent defiance. The next flight, the next silence, the next moment might just change everything.